The psychology of people who feel older than their age. There are people who move through life with a quiet heaviness, as if they have lived more years than the calendar allows. Their eyes carry a tired wisdom. Their hearts beat in slower rhythms. And even in rooms filled with laughter, they often feel slightly outside of it all, watching, understanding, absorbing. This is not about maturity, not about responsibility. It's something deeper. A sense of aging that does not belong to the body but to the soul. A feeling of having survived storms no one else remembers. A feeling of having grown up on the inside long before the outside ever caught up. This documentary explores that quiet phenomenon, the people who feel older than their age and the silent psychology beneath their premature emotional aging. Some people begin aging long before life gives them permission. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, in the background of childhood days that should have been light. While other children are learning how to play, they are learning how to notice. How to sense the shifts in a room. How to read a parent's silence. How to understand the unspoken things that adults think children cannot hear. Early awareness is rarely loud. It begins as a soft tug, an instinct that something is fragile, something is changing, something is not safe to lean on. And from that moment, a child becomes older in ways no birthday can ever measure. They learn to watch. They learn to listen. They learn to carry questions that don't have answers yet. For many, it starts with sensitivity. Not the kind that makes someone cry easily, but the kind that makes someone feel deeply. A sensitivity to tension, to disappointment, to the small cracks in people's voices. A child who senses the emotional weather before anyone names it. They grow up understanding the coldness in a sentence, the tremble beneath laughter, the shift in energy that others overlook. It turns them into quiet observers of life. Not by choice but by necessity. Some speak less because they are calculating the right moment to exist. Some hesitate to ask for help because they sense how overwhelmed others already are. Some become the peacekeepers, the protectors, the ones who apologize even when they are not at fault. This is how emotional time moves faster. Not through years but through responsibilities no one acknowledges. There is often a moment, a memory so faint that they don't even recognize its significance, when a young mind begins to understand the emotional complexity of adults. Maybe it's the night they heard an argument through thin walls. Maybe it's the day a parent's sadness felt heavier than their own fear. Maybe it's the first time they realized someone they trusted could be unpredictable, fragile, or tired in ways they didn't know how to fix. These moments are small but they rearrange something inside. They turn innocence into insight. They turn playfulness into caution. They turn childhood into an apprenticeship for adulthood. And from that point on, time feels different. Children who feel older than their age often develop an early ability to reflect. They see consequences before they unfold. They worry about things they cannot control. They carry the emotional atmosphere of the home like a second skin. They think before they speak. They think before they feel. They think before they rest. To the world, they may seem disciplined, wise, thoughtful. But inside, they are simply trying to keep life from breaking in ways they don't yet understand. Others might call them mature. But maturity born from fear never feels like maturity. It feels like an internal stiffening, a quiet bracing against what might come next. This early awareness creates a strange gap. On the outside, they may still look young, still laugh, still play along. But internally, they carry years of emotional translation. They understand exhaustion before they've lived enough life to earn it. They understand withdrawal before they've had the chance to trust. They understand impermanence before they've had time to feel safe. It is not that they deliberately grow older. It is that they never truly get to grow young. In school, they are the ones who sit slightly apart, not because they don't want connection but because they are too aware of how fragile it can be. In friendships, they become the listener, the counselor, the one who absorbs more than they share. In family, they become the steady one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't make things harder. All of this creates an identity forged too early. A quiet steadiness. A premature understanding of human behavior. A sense that they must always be strong, thoughtful, or composed. This chapter of emotional aging begins long before adulthood ever arrives. And yet, it sets the tone for everything that follows. The patterns, the defenses, the inner conflicts, and the silent years they carry within themselves. Early awareness is not their fault. It is the echo of what they were asked to feel before they knew how to name it. Emotional years do not appear out of nowhere. They have origins, quiet environments, silent responsibilities, and patterns passed down through generations. People who feel older than their age often grow up in places where time behaves differently. Spaces where childhood is allowed but not fully lived. Homes where laughter exists, but only in fragments. Families where safety is present, but not guaranteed. These are the places where inner years begin. For many, the early aging comes from responsibility. Not the ordinary chores or expectations that help children grow, but the kind of responsibility that reshapes identity. Being the one who calms the storms. The one who notices when an adult is hurting. The one who manages their own emotions because no one around them has room to hold them. These responsibilities teach a young heart how to monitor, how to soothe, how to endure. But they also teach something else, how to age without growing. A child who becomes the emotional anchor of a household learns to carry weight that adults should have shared. They try to keep peace in a world too big for them. They try to interpret mood so they can protect themselves. They learn early that stability is something they must create, not something they can rely on. Others grow older from unpredictability. From homes where emotions swing like weather, warm one day, cold the next. These children learn to stay alert, scanning for signs, preparing for impact. Hypervigilance becomes their quiet companion. They age in the spaces between uncertain footsteps and unspoken rules. Some gain years through loss or fear. A parent who is ill. A family structure that shifts suddenly. Financial struggles. Arguments. Absence. The feeling of watching adults crumble under pressures they cannot name. In these environments, children become the ones who adapt first, who understand too much, who sense danger long before it becomes real. And then there are the subtle households, the ones that look stable from the outside but starve a child emotionally. Families that prioritize survival over connection. Homes where love is present but inconsistent. Places where feelings are minimized, brushed aside, or treated as burdens. In such environments, a child learns to internalize everything. They learn self-reliance not as a strength but as a necessity. These origins create a certain kind of emotional architecture. It is sturdy but lonely, insightful but exhausted, perceptive but rarely understood. Some people age early because they are raised by adults who themselves were prematurely aged. Parents who never healed, guardians who carried their own invisible years. And so the cycle repeats, quietly, unintentionally. A child watches a parent survive instead of thrive, and they inherit the blueprint of vigilance and restraint. In many families, the older feeling child becomes the good one. The one who doesn't cause trouble. The one who adapts quickly. The one who can read a room without speaking. Adults praise them for their maturity, unaware that the child is simply shape-shifting to fit the emotional gaps around them. This praise becomes a trap. To stay loved, they must stay strong. To stay accepted, they must stay quiet. To stay safe, they must stay older than they are. Years accumulate this way, not through trauma alone but through patterns. Through watching others struggle. Through carrying burdens that were too heavy too soon. Through learning that they must be responsible for things no one ever taught them how to handle. Eventually, these accumulated experiences create a psychological structure that belongs to someone much older. A child becomes a caretaker, a mediator, a silent analyst of the world around them. They understand fragility long before they understand play. They understand consequences long before they understand freedom. The origins of emotional aging are rarely dramatic. They are slow, subtle, and often invisible to others. But they shape everything, the way someone loves, trusts, fears, connects, and rests. Because before a person ever reaches adulthood, they have already lived years that no one else saw. They have already grown in places no one else noticed. And their inner age has already begun to outpace the number written on their birth certificate. There is a science behind the feeling of being older than your age, an invisible architecture shaped by the brain, the nervous system, and the psychology of adaptation. When someone grows too soon, it is not simply emotional maturity. It is neurobiological survival, sculpted slowly by repeated experiences that teach the mind to stay alert, stay aware, stay prepared. The brain does not measure years. It measures patterns. It measures threat. It measures what must be carried and what must be remembered. For people who age inwardly before their time, the body becomes the first witness. Their nervous system adjusts, often long before they can speak. A household where moods shift unpredictably teaches the brain to stay on guard. A caregiver who withdraws emotionally trains the child to scan constantly for signs of disconnection. Stress hormones rise and settle in rhythms that become habitual. This is not imagination. It is physiology. Chronic stress in childhood can accelerate emotional development, not in the sense of wisdom but in the sense of vigilance. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting danger, becomes more active. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and analysis, becomes more engaged. A child learns to anticipate outcomes, read cues, and protect themselves by thinking ahead. This is why many young people who feel older are described as overthinkers. Their brains were taught that thinking is safety. Thoughtfulness became a shield, not a choice. Then there is emotional labor, the silent workload that children carry when they manage other people's feelings. It might be comforting a stressed parent. It might be preventing conflict between adults. It might be hiding their own emotions to avoid triggering someone else's. Emotional labor forces the mind to develop empathy, awareness, and restraint at a speed far beyond what they should ever need. In psychology, this is known as parentification, hypervigilance, or emotional role reversal. But to the child, it simply feels like responsibility, a responsibility that never belonged to them. Attachment theory also plays a role. People who feel older than their age often grew up with caregivers who were inconsistent, loving at times, distant at others. This inconsistency teaches a child to become self-sufficient. When emotional needs are not reliably met, the brain learns to suppress those needs. This suppression can look like maturity, but it is actually a coping strategy. A way to stay safe in environments where vulnerability feels risky. These patterns do not disappear with age. They follow a person into adolescence and adulthood. They influence how someone loves, how they communicate, and how they trust. Someone who grew up aging too soon might struggle to relax because their nervous system never learned how to stand down. They might prefer stability and structure because unpredictability once meant danger. They might feel emotionally older because they've been monitoring the world for so long that vigilance feels natural. Psychologists call this developmental compression, the squeezing of emotional growth into a timeline that is too short. It creates individuals who appear composed and capable, even when internally they feel weary. It produces adults who have the emotional scars of someone much older, but the lived years of someone still young. And yet, people rarely see this. They see responsibility, not the fear behind it. They see calmness, not the exhaustion beneath it. They see strength, not the years of self-teaching that created it. Growing too soon also changes the way someone interprets their identity. When they are constantly the stable one, the mature one, the insightful one, they begin to believe that they have no right to be anything else. They may deny their youth. They may silence their inner child. They may forget how to rest or how to play. The psychology of premature aging is not about wisdom. It is about adaptation. It is about the brain molding itself around the challenges it faced. It is about survival strategies that became personality traits. And behind all of it lies a simple truth: they did not grow older. They were shaped older. Inside people who feel older than their age, there is a subtle war, a conflict that rarely becomes visible to the world. It is the tension between who they learn to be and who they wish they could be. A part of them longs to rest, to be carefree, to feel young without guilt. But another part, older and heavier, whispers reminders of caution, responsibility, and restraint. This internal conflict does not come from immaturity. It comes from experience. They have lived from the inside out for so long that even moments of fun can feel unfamiliar. Laughter may arrive, but only cautiously. Joy may appear, but only in small sparks, as if the mind is checking whether it is safe to expand. Relaxation becomes something that must be earned, not something that simply happens. The world sees them as composed. But inside, they carry a constant hum of quiet tension, the sense that they must stay alert even when no danger is present. This is what emotional aging does. It plants an older consciousness in a younger body. And so they move through life with two selves, the self that wants to be free, and the self that feels responsible for holding everything together. These two selves collide in many subtle ways. At gatherings, they may feel disconnected, not because they lack social skills, but because their minds drift into deeper layers of observation. While others talk casually, they are noticing tone, sincerity, insecurity, subtext. It makes them seem distant, even though their awareness is simply wider. In relationships, they often become the stable one, the one who listens, supports, understands. People feel safe around them, but this safety comes with a hidden cost. They become the emotional container for others, while rarely letting anyone hold them. This imbalance creates a quiet ache, the desire to be vulnerable battling the instinct to stay self-reliant. Internally, they carry the belief that they must always be calm, always rational, always the one who has it together. These expectations are invisible, but they feel permanent. Breaking them feels dangerous, as if one moment of softness might unravel the identity they've spent years constructing. This is the heart of the conflict. The desire to be young is still there. It never disappears. It simply has no place to land. There is also a subtle grief, the grief of missed spontaneity. Moments they skipped because they were too aware, too cautious, too responsible. Times they wanted to be loud, unfiltered, impulsive but couldn't. Their emotional age kept pulling them backward, whispering lessons about consequences and self-control. People who feel older than their age often carry the paradox of being deeply sensitive yet emotionally guarded. Their sensitivity allows them to understand others effortlessly. But their guardedness prevents them from being understood in the same way. They crave connection yet fear dependency. They want support, yet distrust the idea of needing it. This creates a life built on contradictions, wanting closeness but preferring solitude, feeling lonely but avoiding vulnerability, craving emotional rest but staying in roles that require strength. There is a unique exhaustion that comes from being the strong one, not because the role is forced but because it slowly becomes the only role they know how to play. And with time, strength becomes mistaken for identity, and identity becomes mistaken for worth. Even moments of love can trigger conflict. Someone caring deeply for them may feel unsettling. Being seen feels foreign. Being held feels risky. They are used to giving, not receiving. Accepting care can feel like losing control, like becoming younger than they are allowed to be. The quiet conflict within is not dramatic. It rarely erupts. It shows itself in hesitation, in silence, in the way they overthink their emotions. It appears in their difficulty trusting softness, in their inability to fully surrender to rest, in their fear of becoming a burden. But beneath this conflict lies something tender, a younger self still waiting for permission to exist. A self that never disappeared, just learned to stay quiet. For people who feel older than their age, change does not happen suddenly. Healing rarely arrives through grand breakthroughs or dramatic revelations. It comes quietly, through small, gentle moments that slip into their lives almost unnoticed. Moments that do not erase the years they carry but soften the edges of those years, allowing space for something new to breathe. One of the first turning points often arrives through connection. Not loud, overwhelming connection, but a quiet presence. Someone who understands without demanding, who listens without pulling, who offers warmth without expecting anything in return. These kinds of relationships, rare and delicate, teach a person that care can exist without pressure, without performance, without the need to earn it. A friend who asks how they are, and truly wants to know. A partner who sees their exhaustion before they explain it. A mentor who speaks to them as if they are allowed to be young, uncertain, imperfect. These simple interactions begin to loosen the identity that has been built around strength and responsibility. They create a gap, a small opening where the younger self, long silenced, can step forward for a breath. Then there are moments of unexpected softness. A slow morning where the world feels gentle. A conversation that brings clarity instead of confusion. A moment of laughter that feels real, not rehearsed. These experiences do not change the story all at once. But they challenge the belief that life must always be heavy, always be monitored, always be carried alone. Another turning point occurs when someone sees themselves reflected in others. When they meet someone who feels older too, someone who has lived the same emotional years, walked the same internal distances. There is a quiet relief in realizing that their inner aging is not a personal failure, it is a shared human phenomenon. A pattern. A response. A survival story. This recognition shifts something inside. It creates a sense of belonging where isolation once lived. And sometimes the turning point is internal. A thought. A realization. A small moment of honesty that reveals how tired they truly are. An inner whisper that says, "You don't have to hold everything anymore." These realizations are not demands for change, they are invitations. Invitations to rest even briefly. Invitations to question the roles they have carried for so long. For some, the shift comes from the first time they set a boundary. A small one, gentle but firm. Saying no to a request they would once have accepted instantly. Choosing not to take responsibility for someone else's emotions. Allowing themselves to step back instead of stepping in. These moments feel uncomfortable at first, but they mark an important shift. The recognition that their worth does not depend on their usefulness. For others, the turning point is the discovery of stillness. A quiet walk. A moment alone without fear. A pause that feels peaceful rather than empty. These are the experiences that teach the nervous system something it rarely learned in childhood. That stillness can be safe, not dangerous. And there are turning points that come from grief. Realizing that they have missed parts of their youth, parts that cannot be recovered. Instead of breaking them, this grief creates clarity. It shows them what they want to protect now, what they want to reclaim, what they want to experience before more years slip by unnoticed. Change for them is never loud. It is never forced. It arrives like a slow tide. Every small moment nudges them toward a new understanding. They do not have to be older inside forever. Their emotional age is not destiny, it is history. And history can be rewritten, not by erasing what came before, but by allowing gentleness to enter the story. These turning points do not resolve everything, but they mark the beginning of a new emotional timeline, one where the past softens, the present expands, and the future becomes a place they can move toward without fear. There comes a time, often quietly and without ceremony, when the inner years begin to settle. Not because they disappear and not because a person suddenly feels young again, but because the weight of those years finally finds a place to rest. After a lifetime of carrying too much, the mind begins to understand something it never learned in childhood. That safety is possible. That not every moment needs to be monitored. That the world does not always need to be held together by their effort alone. This settling is subtle. It does not feel like transformation. It feels like exhaling. People who have felt older than their age for most of their lives often expect healing to feel like awakening, like rising, like suddenly becoming light. But emotional settling is different. It feels grounded, steady, slow. As if the older version of themselves, the one forged in vigilance and responsibility, finally sits down beside the younger version that has been waiting in silence. This internal meeting is not dramatic. It is a quiet recognition that both parts belong. The older self knows how to protect. The younger self knows how to hope. And healing begins when the two stop fighting each other. Integration happens when people realize they no longer need to live entirely in the oldest parts of their psyche. The survival strategies that once kept them safe begin to loosen their grip. Hypervigilance fades into awareness. Overthinking becomes reflection instead of fear. Responsibility transforms from obligation into choice. There is a shift, almost imperceptible, where independence stops feeling like isolation and begins to feel like freedom. For many, this transition comes with the experience of emotional safety, something they may have never fully known before. In a stable relationship. In a calm phase of life. In a moment where their internal alarms stay silent long enough for the body to recognize rest. The nervous system learns new rhythms, softer rhythms. The brain rewires itself slowly, responding to consistency, predictability, connection. Safety does not erase the older years. It simply teaches them where to settle. There is also an internal forgiveness that emerges. Forgiveness not for others but for themselves. For the ways they had to grow. For the roles they had to play. For the feelings they suppressed. They begin to understand that their early emotional aging was never a flaw. It was adaptation, intelligence, resilience. A young mind doing its best in conditions that asked for too much. This realization softens their relationship with their past. They stop blaming themselves for the burdens they carried. They stop resenting the parts of themselves that became old too early. Instead, they start honoring those parts, respecting them, thanking them. And in that gratitude, those inner years loosen. The older feeling self begins to shift from protector to guide, stepping back far enough for the present moment to have space. The younger feeling self, once buried under layers of caution, begins to stretch, breathe, and participate. Life becomes less about survival and more about presence. People often describe this stage as finally growing into themselves. Not into a version imposed by others, but into a version shaped by understanding, acceptance, and rest. They begin to trust their own pace. They choose relationships that nourish rather than drain them. They let go of responsibilities that were never theirs to hold. The inner years settle not because life becomes easy, but because the person no longer faces it alone. The self they built in childhood, the strong one, the stable one, no longer has to stand guard at every door. The adult self can take over now. The self who knows the world better. The self who has more tools, more freedom, more power. This is the quiet truth of integration. The past stops controlling the present. The older inner age becomes part of the story, not the whole story. And slowly, gently, the emotional timeline begins to align. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough for life to feel less heavy, for the heart to feel less ancient, for the mind to experience moments of age-appropriate ease. The inner years do not vanish. They find balance. There is a quiet moment in life when all the years a person has carried begin to feel like something less like a burden and more like a companion. The inner age that once weighed heavily in every movement, thought, and emotion no longer dictates the pace of living. It rests beside them, patient, steady, silent, like an old friend who has traveled far and now simply watches. For people who have felt older than their age, this is the soft place to land. Not a place of forgetting, not a place of erasing, but a space where every part of themselves is seen, acknowledged, and finally accepted. The younger self, once tentative, allowed to play. The older self, once vigilant, allowed to relax. The two meet and merge into a whole that no longer feels fractured or defensive. They may notice it in small ways. A genuine laugh that lasts longer than expected. A moment of curiosity that is unguarded. A conversation where they allow someone else to carry the weight, just as they once carried for others. They may see beauty in ordinary things that once seemed trivial, because the mind is no longer consumed with survival. This soft place is also found in quiet relationships. Those that do not demand perfection or constant caretaking. Someone who notices without interrupting, someone who listens without judgment, someone who loves without requiring the older self to perform. These relationships reinforce the truth they have always longed for. They do not have to endure alone, and they do not have to carry more than they can bear. And yet, there is tenderness in remembering. The early years of silent responsibility, vigilance, and overthinking are not forgotten, because they shaped resilience, empathy, and insight. They were not wasted years. They were the soil from which the capacity for depth grew. To acknowledge them is to honor the journey, while also releasing the need to remain perpetually burdened by it. In this reflective state, life feels less like a series of tests or obstacles and more like a tapestry, each thread, bright or dark, contributing to the whole. They understand that feeling older than their age was never a flaw. It was a different rhythm of life, an accelerated awareness, an invitation to know complexity early. And now they may notice that they are still capable of wonder, still capable of innocence, still capable of trusting that the world can hold them too. The soft place to land is also the recognition of impermanence. Every moment, every emotion, every year, young or old, is passing. They learn to move with it rather than against it. To allow grief, joy, and curiosity to coexist. To give themselves permission to feel fully, without judgment or expectation. There is serenity in this balance. A peace that comes not from erasing what was, but from embracing it. A calm that arises not from perfection, but from understanding. The inner age, once a source of isolation, becomes a quiet guide, reminding them of depth, resilience, and wisdom. Yet it no longer overshadows laughter, curiosity, or the capacity to breathe freely. In this final reflection, the truth is simple and luminous. People who feel older than their age are not broken. They are awake. They have witnessed life earlier, felt more than most, and survived without recognition. And in landing softly, accepting themselves fully, they finally experience the subtle joy of being whole, old enough to understand, young enough to play, and human enough to carry it all with gentle grace. The inner years, once hurried, now unfold at their own pace. They become a quiet rhythm, a companion, a guide. And finally, life feels possible, rich, expansive, tender, and profoundly alive.